All right, so we are back, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of who India Ramey is. She mentioned her briefly about her story before the song, and I really want to get into the story now. I mean, when I first heard about you, I don't even know how it happened, but somehow you came across my timeline on one of my social medias, and I was absolutely blown away by your mountain song and the video. And we've talked about this, off air in DMs and stuff. Just a phenomenal sound of what you do. And then to find out what your backstory is beyond the music just intrigued me so much. So I'm so excited to have you here. But let's try to start at the beginning. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Rome, Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and we lived there till I was about 12 years old, and then my family moved to Alabama, and I went to school at a fine arts school that was seventh grade through 12th grade in Birmingham, Alabama. So I've lived like the bulk of my life in Birmingham.
okay. So really, Alabama um, roots, so to speak. There's a lot of Alabama themes on this show this season, guys. I don't know what's up with that, but it's kind of a
Yeah,
cool
roll
thing.
tide.
Yeah, it's awesome. So we'll start with the music before we really get into your first passion, which it's very unfortunate that it was your first passion, but we'll talk about that. But what were your first musical memories and influences growing up? What's the real first concrete memory you can remember that has to do with music?
Well, the irony is my biggest country music influencer was my father. He was really into outlaw country and Willie and Waylon. And as a young child, like I'm talking like 3 or 4 years old, I fell in love with Jesse Coulter. And I would make my family gather around in the living room and listen to me sing Jesse Coulter and my mom's curling iron. And so that's some of my earliest memories. But like my mom was a rocker. She was really into Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles and Queen. That was always playing in our house, like on cleaning day. And then like my sister Autumn's 10 years older than me. She was a punk rocker and a new waver. And so I got her influence from that.
That's
So I'm
amazing.
like all over the place.
That's amazing. It's always cool when you listen to an artist now and then try to figure out how that came to be. Just it's like a different recipe in the kitchen, right? Like you add or take away one little ingredient, and everything can be different. Um,
Yeah.
now, let's really get into the crux real quick. Some of the best stories I feel are born of struggle, stress, and I mean even sometimes fear, right? So, obviously, you're a very vocal advocate for domestic violence prevention. Do you mind telling us your story?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I've been telling it most of my life. I'm kind of an open book about it because I think that when we talk about these things, it can really help somebody and make them
Absolutely.
realize that they're not alone.
Hmm.
From the time I was born, I was witnessing my father brutally abuse my sweet little mama, and she finally got up the courage to leave him once and for all when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And that's, usually that's when the violence escalates.
Yep.
And it did. It really did. I mean, he was a monster. He would break down our door in the middle of the night and, commit violence while we watched. And I have pretty severe PTSD from the things that I saw as such a young child. And I've just, most of my life, I've actually, even though I'm open about talking about it, I was also trying to downplay it at the same time,
Yeah.
and be like, no, I'm good. I'm normal. It's fine. I'm just like y'all. And that kind of caught up with me a few years ago. So I've been in trauma therapy for the past 4 years, and I've been a big proponent of mental health and getting therapy. I think everybody could use a little bit of therapy, and it sure has changed my life.
Absolutely. I want to tell you first of all that my wife, I've been with her since 2015, was essentially your mom in the story of your story. She's dealt with that. Her ex-husband and her kids were brutally violated all the time. So this story really hits home to me just because of what my wife has gone through. So I know I know her PTSD. I know her blocks and struggles, and even to this day, when she knows she's absolutely safe, she's still. It's so difficult to convince herself of that, right? Um, Now, as kids, I kind of want to. I don't have any background in psychiatry or any of that stuff, but as kids, I feel like we typically either gravitate towards the things we know the best, or sometimes we understand the wrongness of those things and we shun them with everything we have, right? So, like for me, I grew up in a house with a lot of alcoholics in my family. So I feel like I had two choices as a kid. I was either going to fall in line and become an alcoholic, or I was going to absolutely block out alcohol with all of my being. And fortunately for me, I chose to shun alcohol and alcoholism. And by proxy, I feel like your choices are somewhat similar. And you chose to walk down the path of becoming a lawyer and an advocate and a domestic violence prosecutor. Can you take us through your mental process in choosing the law profession initially?
Yeah, I mean, it was really I did it for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of felt like it was my calling to do that job of service, to try to make a difference for people that were like my mom and people that were like me. It kind of like was born out of when I was in college. I started volunteering at a battered women's shelter, and I was a co-facilitator for a children's support group, and kind of let them know that there's a future beyond what you're experiencing right now, being in a shelter and being afraid. You can get to a point like me where I'm in college and I'm getting an education and doing things for my future. And I paid my way through college by doing Miss Alabama pageants, and we had to have a platform, and my platform was domestic violence. And I spoke about it all over the state of Alabama at schools, and I spoke to state legislatures about domestic violence prevention. So when it came time for me to just, to get a real job, quote unquote, I was like, well, I mean, naturally, I'm going to do this. And I really felt like it was something that I was supposed to do. And I enjoyed my job, and it meant so much to me to get to do that job, but it was a massive PTSD trigger.
Oh, I
And
imagine.
I was just a nervous wreck. I cried all the time. I was also in a bad marriage when I was in that job too. And it got to a point where I called my mom and I said, I feel so guilty for not wanting to do this anymore. And she said, India, I'm living without domestic violence in my life. I think it's about time that you did too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I pivoted to a private practice, but I was in a band and I was writing songs, and I just felt like it was a time in my life where I needed to do something for me. And I feel like music has been the new medium for me to advocate for battered women and people in relationship violence. And I feel like it's given me a bigger platform.
Now, don't take this the wrong way. This might be a strong question. I don't mean it as such at all, but it's you made me curious. Do you feel like that time as a prosecutor was kind of like a sentence you served, and now you feel like I've done that. I did what I had to do, and I don't feel like I can do anything else there. So, is that part of the reason why you feel you moved on?
Yeah, like it started to feel like a cross that I was bearing.
Right,
And
right.
I realized that it was somebody else's cross. Like I was there's a line in one of my songs and Never Going Back where I say, I've done hard time for someone else's crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom really felt strongly about she just wanted me to do what made me feel happy and made me feel safe.
Right, and coming from a place of victimhood too, and now you're a prosecutor, I imagine that empathy kind of probably didn't help you as much as you thought it would as a prosecutor, right?
It didn't. I always felt like, I mean, I think everybody struggles with imposter syndrome,
Right,
but
right.
I had it like 100 times worse when I was doing that work because I wanted to be perfect for every single one of those women and every single one of those victims and their children. And, no human being is perfect. So I drove myself nuts, trying to be the best domestic violence prosecutor that God ever made. And it was just too much pressure
Yeah.
for a person struggling with anxiety in the first place.
Right, and I imagine there's probably a lot of times where you're comparing each situation with your own or your mom's own, and there's just so much to unpack there from the standpoint of just human nature, right? I mean, music was clearly a natural path for you, but looking at it from the outside, you wouldn't think lawyer, musician would be the
Yeah.
natural flow of things. But in this story, it really truly is. And I want to talk about that as well.